Hello, a very warm good morning to all of you, and welcome to Unacademy. Welcome to today's The Hindu newspaper analysis, where we take a look at the international edition of today's The Hindu newspaper and take a look at the articles relevant for your examination and, wherever possible, extract the importance for the mains as well as prelims. Along with that, we also take a look at the practice questions and how to write answers out of it. At the end of the session, I do advise you to visit the Telegram channel and take a look at the multiple choice questions, the MCQs that can be framed from all these topics and analyze your level of understanding and your level of retention. So, today we are going to have a look at 8 different topics, obviously for varying depths, starting with the Conference of Parties number 30, which is being initiated at Belém in Brazil. Now, this is going to be relevant for your GS paper 3. Then, climate change imbalance in fertilizer use that has got the potential to impact the soil. That is as per a research by ICAR. So, this is again relevant for your GS paper 3. Then, applying the Dravidian algorithm in sports. This is an editorial piece. Now, this is slightly political in terms of its connotation, but we are going to take a look at the major highlights and we are going to understand how state governments like Tamil Nadu they are investing in sports and what can be the outcome of it. And that can also be a kind of a way forward for rest of the states in the country who want to do particularly well when it comes to sports. Then greater openness. This is an editorial piece dealing with the obscurity, or rather the opaqueness of how Vantara, one of the largest private zoos in the world, how do they operate and why there is a need for having an open and a transparent nature of transactions for or animals in Vantara. So that is your GS paper 3 again. Does India need, and also GS paper 2 in terms of the governance aspect, does India need nutritional transformation? This is about the concept of functional foods and why India does need the provision of functional foods and how, going ahead into the future, India can actually work for it. So, this is again relevant for your GS paper 3. And some of the articles. For example, Aditya L1 gets a close look at the eruptions from the sun. With the help of this, we will take a look at what do we understand by the coronal mass ejections which are emitted by the sun. How do they look like? With the help of an animation, we will try to understand those features as well. So, starting with the first topic of the day, Conference of Parties 30, Beginner's Guide on What to Expect from the Climate Summit. So, this Conference of Parties number 30, so basically, this is the 30th meeting. This is a part of the meeting, what is referred to as a convention, United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. So that is the convention. Now, what is a convention and how is it different from what you hear as a protocol and so on, or a treaty? So, a convention is a grouping where the group decides upon a common goal. A group tends to decide upon a common ambition. For example, if you want to limit the depletion of ozone layer, right? If you want to prevent the ozone hole from expanding, the countries got together and you had a Vienna Convention in 1985. Similarly, if you want to have a prevention, or if you have a goal that endangered species of animals and plants, they should not be traded or trafficked from one region to another. So you have Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species. If you want to conserve the migratory species, so you have Convention on Migratory Species. So like that, you basically have the conventions. So, United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, the goal of it was to basically limit the global warming. Limit global warming. Now, how do you limit global warming? So, basically, by reducing the emission of greenhouse gases, reducing emissions of greenhouse gases. Okay. Now, that was basically set as a fundamental. Now, when was this Framework Convention on Climate Change arrived at? This United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change was arrived at in 1992, what was also referred to as the Rio Summit or the Earth Summit. Now, in this Rio Summit or Earth Summit, this was very landmark or an instrumental summit. What is a summit, by the way? You hear about summit, G20 summit, and so on. So, what is this summit? Summit is referred to as a meeting of the leaders representing the top leadership of their country, for example. So, what is the actual interpretation of a summit if you take a look at the vocabulary? So, it refers to the top, right? You summit the Everest, you summit the mountain. So, a summit meeting is a meeting of the global heads of state. That is what a summit meeting refers to, right? So, led by the presidents and the prime minister. The Rio Summit, which was held in 1992, that was known for arriving at three important documents and three important conventions. One of the convention was United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. Another convention was United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification, to prevent the expansion of deserts in the world. And the third convention was the Convention for Biological Diversity, that is UNCBD. So these were the three conventions which were arrived at. Now, United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change is the one that we are interested in. It is the one which is also referred to as the Climate Convention. Climate Convention. Okay, that is what is referred to. Now, when we talk about this Framework Convention on Climate Change, basically, it decided upon the fact that we have to limit the amount of greenhouse gas emissions. Greenhouse gas emissions, basically gases like carbon dioxide, methane, sulfur hexafluoride, then you have nitrous oxides, all of this, nitrogen dioxide. These are basically your greenhouse gases. Now, greater amount of greenhouse gases concentration in the atmosphere leads to greater amount of warming, and the planet, the temperature is rising day by day. Already, the IPCC, that is the scientific arm of climate, if you think about it, what is referred to as the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. So, IPCC has reported by 2030, we are going to basically cross the 1.5 degrees Celsius threshold. Threshold, which means that the temperature is going to rise by 1.5 degrees Celsius as compared to when? As compared to the pre industrial era, that is prior to the industrial revolution. Why is that important? Because we have to understand that human race has been living on the planet for a long period of time. The emissions were never very massive. But ever since the onset of industrial revolution, the development of factories, the burning of the fossil fuels started in larger amount, which led to the development of Western countries in particular, European nations, Americans, and all of that. They developed on the backbone and the backdrop of these fossil fuel, coal burning, and so on. But at the same time, the amount of greenhouse gases which were actually introduced into the atmosphere were so very high that it started leading to a rise in global temperatures. We have seen that across various places, not only in India, but across the globe as well. For example, if you take the case of European nations, some of the European nations are already experiencing a temperature rise of around 4 or 4.5 degrees Celsius as compared to the pre industrial era. So, that is what the climate convention was targeting, to limit that. Now, the first conference of party, COP1, now that was held in 1995 in Berlin. Now, this conference of parties is the meeting of the highest decision making body, right? So you have the secretariat. Secretariat will do the clerical work, the negotiating work, and so on. But the decisions about the future, about the finances, about the targets, about the goals, about the emissions, that is taken by the highest decision making body. And that meets once a year, or once every year rather. And that is referred to as the Conference of Parties. Now, if let's suppose any country does not volunteer that I will hold the conference of parties for climate convention this year, then automatically the COP is held at Bonn. Otherwise, you have five different geographies of the world competing for hosting the conference of parties. Now, conference of parties for the first time was held in 1995, where the decision was taken that we have to limit the emission of these six greenhouse gases. But then, after that, the instrumental one was Conference of Parties number three, and it was held in 1997 in the Japanese city of Kyoto. And this is where the Kyoto Protocol was arrived at. So, what is a protocol? How is it different from a convention? You hear about the Montreal Protocol, you hear about the Kyoto Protocol, so or Cartagena Protocol, Nagoya Protocol. So, what are these protocols, and how is that different from a convention? To understand this, let's suppose you have set an ambition, you have set a goal, few of you, and this is the example that I oftentimes give so that you can relate it to your preparation purposes as well. Suppose few of you get together and you decide that you will prepare for your civil services examination and you will clear the examination, let's suppose in 2027. Now, you have set a goal of clearing the exam in 2027. Let's suppose you guys met together at one of the local cafes, or let's suppose at Cafe Coffee Day or CCD. So, your decision to clear the examination by 2027 will be the CCD convention, where at that convention you have decided upon a goal that you will clear the exam. But then, after going home, you guys realize that you have not decided upon when to prepare for the prelims, when to prepare for the mains, how to go about the answer writing, which optional to choose. So then, after a week, all of you meet again together, let's suppose at Domino's and over a pizza, and you then decide that, okay, I will finish the prelims preparation, let's suppose in 6 months, I will start with the answer writing thereafter. This is the time when I will study for the options. So you fix a timed goal or a timeline in order to achieve the ultimate aim. So that will be your Domino's protocol to the CCD convention. So, a protocol to a convention is actually a timeline by which the goal can be achieved. So, Kyoto Protocol to the Framework Convention on Climate Change was basically deciding upon the goals, the timeline, which the by which the emissions have to be reduced by the developed countries of the world, and how much the emissions have to be reduced, which are the countries which have a goal or a target to reduce the emission, and how should they do that. So that was the key outcome of the Kyoto Protocol. Kyoto Protocol was also well known for basically another aspect, and that is it talked about the principle of common but differentiated responsibility, something that we will talk about briefly. Other than that, it also introduced market mechanism. Market mechanism. That means the carbon trade, carbon emission trade. So basically, it introduced a kind of a flexibility for the countries that if you are not able to fulfill your targeted obligations or the amount of target that has been given by the convention, if you are exceeding your emissions beyond that, then you can trade that extra emissions. You can pay some other country some money and gain some carbon credits. Now that morphed into the very famous Article 6 of the Climate Convention, something that UPSC had asked this year in the prelims examination as well. Now, this continued. Now, after this, you had multiple conference of parties which were held time and time again, year after year, to decide upon what shall be the outcome of it. Now, amongst the instrumental ones, you will find that by the way, the planned period for the Kyoto Protocol was in the year 2008 to 2012 13. Now, what should the world do beyond 2012? The world had not arrived at a consensus. The world did not know what should be the next set of targets. So that is when you had a conference of parties in Doha. COP Doha in 2013, which brought about the Doha Amendment. Now, this was Doha Amendments extended the plan period from 2012, extended it till 2020 to 2020. Right? Now, what to do beyond 2020? Now, that was a major headache. Now, countries like US at that point of time, being led by Barack Obama, now he was very serious about climate change and the impact of it. Now, Barack Obama was one of those key leaders instrumental in fermenting a kind of a global consensus to arrive at the next phase of action. And that is when you had the next phase of action decided at Conference of Parties number 21, which was held in Paris. And that is when the Paris Agreement was arrived at. Paris Agreement. Now, this was slightly different from the Kyoto Protocol. How? So, understand it again from an analogy of an aspirant. Suppose, what did Kyoto Protocol do? Kyoto Protocol provided targets for the nations to achieve. And most of the nations were unable to achieve that, right? Saying that these targets were very tough. Paris Agreement changed that. It said that now the countries have to give their own targets. How is it different? For example, let's suppose you are preparing for the examination. Now, today I tell you or give you a target that in this month you have to complete the entire subject of polity and history. Now, you might end up not finishing either of them, and at the end of the month, you will complain to me that you had set such steep targets that it was impossible to achieve. How can you expect me to achieve that? Now, that was the requirement or the condition set by the Kyoto Protocol. Now, what did Paris Agreement do? So now I come to you and I tell you that, okay, I won't give you a target. You tell me what is it that you will study in the next 10 days. You give me your target and I will hold you accountable for that. Then, after 10 days, if you have not achieved that, then for the next 10 days, there will be a kind of a penalty. You have to achieve more than what you have achieved previous. And the next target that you set, anyways, even if you have achieved the 10-day target, the next target that you set for yourself, that has to be slightly more ambitious. So, in the first 10 days, if you have studied about only citizenship, then in the next 10 days, you have to finish fundamental rights, union executive, and so on. So, like that, your targets keep on increasing, but these targets are given by you yourself. So, that is the difference between the Paris Agreement and the Kyoto Protocol. The Paris Agreement talked about the countries and left the onus of the contribution to the countries themselves. And the countries would declare their intended nationally determined contributions in the fight against climate change, what were also referred to as INDC, nationally determined contribution. Now, what if I set a target for myself and I don't achieve that? And then I keep on repeating that, I keep on missing the target, then it defeats the entire purpose in itself, isn't it? So that is why, under the aims or under the principles of Paris Agreement, there was a kind of an agreement, in principle agreement, for a global stocktake mechanism. Global stocktake. That is, now this is a different kind of a GST as it is referred to. It is referred to global stocktake. That is, every 5 years, the countries have to open themselves to international monitoring in order to see whether they have fulfilled the agenda of the previous determined contributions or the previous goals they had provided or not. So it is a kind of an inspection and verification process to be carried out every 5 years. To be carried out every 5 years. Okay. Now, here, basically, as per the Paris Agreement, the aim was what? The aim was to limit warming by 2 degrees. as compared to the pre industrial era. And if possible, if the countries are aligned, then to limit it by 1 point. That was the aspect about it. Now, here you also had the concept which was introduced and which was talked about. That was the concept of the countries aiming to achieve net zero by 2050. That was the expression, or that was the principle. Now, what is net zero? Net zero refers to emissions. So, reducing your emissions so substantially that your emissions are almost close to zero, but whatever you are emitting otherwise also, so it does not always mean that you have zero emissions. You can emit, let's suppose, 1 gigaton of carbon dioxide equivalent, but that 1 gigaton of carbon dioxide equivalent will be absorbed by the trees that you have. So you need to have so many trees, you need to have so many storing devices otherwise, so that there is no net addition of greenhouse gases from that country in itself. So that was the target of net zero. Now, various different countries have announced their own target of net zero, citing developmental purposes and developmental prerogatives. For example, countries like India have said that, look, for a country like UK, US, etc., it is easy to say, or European countries, it is easy to say that I will achieve net zero emission by 2050 because they are already developed. But we need to bring lot many people out of poverty. We need greater amount of energy, more electrification, and that will be done on the basis of the power plants, the coal power plants, the thermal power plants. So we cannot eliminate emissions immediately. So that is where some of the developing nations have changed their net zero target. China, for example, set the ball rolling and set a target of 2060 to achieve net zero. Then in 2021, at Conference of Parties number 26, which was held in Glasgow, when India announced its famous Panchamrit goals for climate. Now, there, India fixed the date for net zero to be achieved by 2070. So, these were the major outcomes up till the Paris Agreement. Now, all of this climate conference works on the basic principle of common but differentiated responsibility, meaning what? It means that, look, climate change is a global phenomena. It is a global responsibility. But are countries like UK also equally responsible to fight against climate change as compared to India? The answer is no. Why? Because the developed countries of the world, they have developed on the back of the emissions. Now, majority of the greenhouse gas emissions which was done in the entirety of the past century was done by these developed nations of the world. They were using the air conditioners, they were burning fossil fuels in the large amount of industries. Whereas in India, air conditioners are still a kind of a luxury in many of the tier 2, tier 3 towns of the country. In India, the industries have started coming up only lately in the past 3 to 4 decades. So that is where there is a historical burden that the developed countries have to face. And that is why the historical burden that the developed countries have to face, that means that is where they have to pay more, right? Pay more because they have the ability to pay more as well. And assist the underdeveloped and developing countries in their fight against climate change by providing technical assistance for renewable power, by providing financial assistance, and so on. So it talks about the historical burden of developing nations. The developing nations, or the developed nations rather. Now, the developed nations of the world in the Paris Agreement had committed close to around $100 billion a year in assistance to the developing nations of the world. But that was nowhere close to getting fructified. And it was also partly because of what followed Barack Obama, something that the world had not even anticipated, right? What followed Barack Obama was a global phenomena that today we refer to as Trump 1.0. Now, when the Donald Trump came into power, now immediately the first thing that he did was he withdrew from the Paris Agreement because he calls this as a kind of a meetup of the global climate conspirators. Now, as per Donald Trump, all of these climate conspirators across the world, they are talking about climate change, but climate change is not a reality. And basically, it is just to favor countries like India. Now, when US withdrew from the Paris Agreement, the other developed nations of the world, they found an excuse that if the most developed nation of the world is not ready to cut its emission and is not ready to pay anything, why should we? So the overall payment which would be given to the developing nations like India to transition into solar energy, to basically provide more renewable capacity, to help them combat climate change, all that funding started to dry up. Now, Donald Trump was replaced by Joe Biden, and then US again joined the Paris Agreement. But at that point of time, the US said, we will pay. But then by that point of time, developed countries of the world, they were already going through a kind of an economic turmoil and they were not ready to pay. During these conference of parties meetings, there were debates which oftentimes became very acrimonious. For example, in the Conference of Parties number 27, which was held in Sharm el Sheikh in Egypt, Australia famously became very aggressive and on the demands by the countries like India. Now, India represents countries of the global south. India is one of the leading voices of what are referred to as a G77 plus China grouping of the developing nations and underdeveloped nations. Now, Australia very famously chided countries like India by saying that, look, you are saying that you cannot help reduce the emission because you have developmental requirements. And you guys are saying that because countries like Australia have already developed, we have to pay more. But the reality is, we will not pay more. Why? Because when we were developing, coal was and petroleum were the sources of energy, known sources of energy. But in today's day and age, you have much better and cleaner sources of energy. So, as a nation, you should work on developing better sources of energy and not keep on blaming the developed nation. They showed the attitude, the changed attitude of the developed nations that we are not ready to pay anymore. Nonetheless, the demand for the payment continued to increase because it was during these times when various different countries faced the wrath of cyclones, hurricanes, rising sea level, and also floods. In India itself, we faced a damage and a destruction close to around 50,000 crores. And that is something which is faced annually because of the cloudbursts, the landslides initiated, all of this because of the climate change. So there was a greater demand by the small island nations, greater demand by the underdeveloped members of the world that please provide us with some amount of money so that we can take care of ourselves because of the climate induced disaster. Pakistan experienced one of the worst floods in decades, where almost one third of the cultivable land of Pakistan was submerged. So the demand grew. And that is when, in Conference of Parties number 28, which was held in Dubai, you had basically the institution of loss and damage fund. Loss and damage fund to be given to those particular countries, those particular nations which are impacted by climate change. Okay. So, here, as this was progressing again, commitments were being given. Then the global phenomena repeated itself. The Donald Trump came into power once again. And again, US withdrew from the Paris Agreement. And as a consequence, all the developed nations of the world again started backtracking. It is in the midst of all this that Conference of Parties number 30 is being held in Belém in Brazil. Now, Belém, the choice of the venue is also quite unique. It stands at the mouth of the Amazon rainforest. Due to climate change and also due to deforestation, the nature of Amazon rainforest in itself is deteriorating. We have to understand that these rainforests, they are known as the lungs of the earth because they absorb in the carbon dioxide and provide oxygen. Now, because of deforestation activities, human interventions, that is why the Amazon is actually turning slowly and steadily what is referred to as the Amazon dieback. Amazon or the Amazonian dieback, which means what? That the rainforest is going to be degraded. It is going to be degraded and it is slowly being converted into a kind of a savanna. That is a grassland. Now, if the rainforest gets converted into a savanna, means what? Carbon absorption will reduce, its ability to provide oxygen will reduce, its ability to harbor or provide shelter to biodiversity will reduce, and overall the temperatures will keep on rising substantially. So that is why Belém as a choice of venue is also quite interesting. Having said that, for your examination perspective, that is, be it prelims, be it the mains exam, as a candidate, you have to be aware that what happened in Conference of Parties number 19 in Warsaw, what happened in Conference of Parties, which was held in Doha, what happened in Conference of Parties number 21, 26, 27, 28, 29, what were the outcomes of them? So that is where yesterday also we have talked about it. And today also I'll say, do look at the environment basics. You will get the entire record of all the details of these previous conference of parties in a brief video itself. So no need to repeat that again. Now, this is where, if you take a look at the map pointing, this is where Belém is situated. Okay. At the mouth of Amazon. So that is where it is a very interesting choice of venue. So it represents a focal point for discussion on forest rights, indigenous rights, and biodiversity protection and conservation as well. Okay. Now, now we will come to some of the aspects of this conference of parties in a write-up relevant for your mains. Now, this conference of parties is also being referred to as the implementation COP, which means all the previously decided ambitions and goals, this conference of parties will talk about how to implement them. For example, in the Conference of Parties number 29, which was held in Baku, Azerbaijan, now there was a decision of a new collective goal. That is, we will, or the world will mobilize close to around $300 billion annually by 2035. And also, including the private sector, the funding would amount to be around $1.3 trillion by 2030. So, how do we implement that? Where do we get the finances from? So that is what this conference of parties will focus upon. Also, the L&D fund, the loss and damage fund, is grossly underfunded. Only around $1 billion are present to be mobilized. And that also commitments given by few of the countries like Japan, UAE, and so on. So there also, there's a lot of scope of how to increase the financial crunch. Okay. So the summit's agenda is guided by global stocktake under the Paris Agreement, which reviews the global progress. It will emphasize on major issues like energy and industry, transport transitions from non-renewable to renewable, stewardship of forests, oceans and biodiversity, and transformation of the food systems. So that is basically the overall aim. Okay. Now, finance is a key issue. So, finance remains the most contentious and the most crucial and critical element. Now, at Baku, that is Conference of Parties number 29, Baku, which is the capital city on the coast of the Caspian, right? Countries agreed to negotiate new collective quantified goal on climate finance to replace the unfulfilled $100 billion per year. $100 billion per year was set uh, in stone by the Paris Agreement, but was agreed upon much earlier. Now, new target is expected to mobilize $300 billion to $1.3 trillion annually by 2030. Where do you get that? Now, from here, one of the major issues that the developing nations like India face is the wording. So, in the outcome of the Conference of Parties number 29 in Baku, for this finance, there was a wording that we will get the finance from all possible sources rather than saying developed nations. Now, this is a very clever play by the developed nations of the world. How? So basically, when you say all sources, that includes civil society organization, private funds, and also the pressure tactic which is put on developing nations. For example, these developed nations had forced countries like China and talked about how China is developing. So China mobilized close to around $3 billion in contribution. Like that, India is also being pressured that you invest more and you assist other countries. So, in a way, the developed nations are shifting the onus of responsibility from themselves now to the developing nations that you take care of yourself. So, that is something which countries like India have found it very, very contentious. So that in the last conference of parties meeting in Baku, Indian delegation almost was close to a walkout based upon this funding crunch. Now, the climate finance, the ongoing challenges are now, even the $300 billion proposal, which is if let's suppose that also happens, even that is woefully short of what is required by the world in terms of to migrate to the cleaner energy, in order to migrate to cleaner fuel, right? The loss and damage fund is still struggling to operationalize adequate resources, and many developing countries continue to face bureaucratic hurdles. And even the money which is given to them by some of the multilateral organizations, they are at a high interest rate. So they are not able to utilize that money for climate finance. Adaptation, so adaptation for adaptation against climate change. So there are two words that you have to be very careful about. One is adaptation, one is mitigation. Mitigation is prevention. So mitigation of climate change, you prevent climate change from happening. Adaptation is that how are you adapting to the changed climate? You know that the sea level is rising. How you are adapting to that? So you are creating coastal barriers, you are shifting the people inland, and so that is adaptation. Mitigation, reduce emissions, provide cooling solutions, and so on. Now, every country of the world is located in different geographical feature and location. So their adaptation goals, their adaptation strategies have to be different. So that is again something which this Conference of Parties 30 at Belém will talk about. And that is where the global goal on adaptation is being seen as a major progress or a major talking point. Now, this global goal on adaptation talks about or seeks to established quantifiable adaptation targets, secure dedicated funding, and promote local and indigenous adaptation practices. For example, the traditional water harvesting systems, the traditional irrigation systems, the localized information or idea about agriculture systems. Now, they have sustained themselves for centuries, if not millennia. So, utilizing and harboring and basically capitalizing upon that indigenous knowledge will be a kind of a way forward. Now, Brazil, as host, is promoting the Tropical Forest Forever facility, something that we have discussed in detail yesterday, where the countries of the world will be paid to maintain and uphold some amount of forest cover, particularly the tropical countries, right? Phasing out fossil fuel subsidies, tripling renewable energy capacity by 2030, doubling energy efficiency, and promoting just transition. That the transitions have to be fair, right? And how does it become fair? By the case that the developed nations they share their technology with the underdeveloped poor countries, so that they can also lead in battery tech, they can also lead in solar tech, photovoltaic cell, wind energy farms, so that their economy does not get damaged, unemployment does not happen just because they are shifting from coal and oil. So that is the case of these goals, which the COP20 at Belém will discuss upon. So I hope that is something which is understood in greater detail. Having said that, 1 week down the line, the world will arrive on the key outcomes. So here also, just to tell you what is expected out of it. You see, you have Prince William, who is traveling to Belém in order to receive a climate award. And look at the hypocrisy of it. That is what yesterday and even today, global newspapers like The Guardian, the BBC, all of them, New York Times have reported that Prince William is traveling thousands of miles in a private chartered jet. Now, the carbon emissions which will happen by that private charter jet will lead to global warming. But why is he doing that? In order to receive a climate goal, because he is helping to fight climate change. So that is the hypocrisy, the double speak that the Western countries are operating upon. So it is unfair for us in India to expect major changes as the outcome of Conference of Parties number 30. What at max we can expect is more ambitious kind of proposals, right? More ambitious kind of targets. But who will fulfill that? There is no verification about that. For example, today I tell you that, by 2030, I will give you 5 lakh rupees, right? Next year, I tell you, I will give you 5 crore rupees. Year after that, I tell you, I will give you 50 crore rupees. And then in 2028, I tell you that I don't have money, I can't give you any money. So that is the kind of commitment that the developed nations are for. Okay. So the practice question: discuss the concept of common but differentiated responsibility, highlight the importance of just transition of energy for developing nations. Now, here, basically, in the intro, what do you talk about? What is the principle of CBDR? How historical uh, responsibility lies on the developed nations. Then, in the body portion, that you talk about the aspect of importance of limiting emissions, okay, and greenhouse gas emissions. So that is where you have to switch to renewable capabilities. Then talk about what is the meaning of just transition. That is, you don't have job losses, everybody is empowered, and you transition to renewable energy. How will that happen? Provide better technology. So talk about that, and eventually you talk about the need for the R. And in the conclusion, you provide the way forward. That the need of the R is to basically provide more funding, mobilize more funding, and not only getting restricted to that, but also developed nations showing by example how that transition can be fastened, and also make the poorer countries a partner in their development rather than loan giver. So that is something we can conclude. Then, before we come to the next topic, the new batch for Unacademy Platinum is starting from 17th of November 2025. Do enroll and do basically become a part of a very different kind of uh, system whereby we are basically asking the candidates for better accountability. We are holding them accountable through one on one mentorship, through dedicated PYQ sessions, and also doubt resolution by switching on their cameras in the class itself. Now, coming to the next article, the ICAR study has talked about climate change, imbalance in fertilizer use impact soil organic component or content. Now, what is soil organic content and what is the meaning of that? Yes, India, Manisha, has fulfilled its ambitions of climate goals and its commitments to climate goals. That is true. Now, here, when we talk about soil organic carbon, what is also known as SOC, now that is a very vital part of soil fertility in general. It is the carbon content in the soil. Where does the soil get the carbon content from? So, the soil gets the carbon content from decomposed plant and animal material. It is the process of decomposition which adds the carbon content. Now, understand it very briefly. So, when we say decomposition in itself is not a simple process. Decomposition has got 5 stages associated to it, right? First of all, you have the case of fragmentation. That is, any organic compound is broken into smaller particles. A leaf, for example, which falls on the soil, after some time, you will find that the insects they break the leaf into smaller components, right? Then after that, you basically have the case of leaching. What is leaching? Where the decomposition or the activity by the microbes increase and the fluidic substances they basically they percolate into the layer of the soil, so that also increases the organic component of the soil. Then after that, you have catabolism. Catabolism. What is catabolism? So again, the microbes, the aerobic bacterium and other microbes, they start working on these organic compounds, secrete their digestive enzymes, and further lead to the breakdown of these organic compounds. So that means any organic compound is made out of carbohydrate or carbon in general. So that will release carbon and carbon compounds into the soil, the carbohydrates into the soil, which can be utilized by the plant materials as well. After that, you have the next stage of the process, which is referred to as humification, where the organic compound is reduced into a dark brownish to blackish amorphous soil like substance. It's not exactly soil, but almost reduced to a soil like substance. This is when the organic compound in the soil or is the highest. But if the necessary conditions of decomposition are present, what are the necessary conditions of decomposition? Availability of moisture, warm temperature, and air, oxygen. These are the necessary conditions for the decomposition to happen. If these are present, then the microbes, they start working on those organic compound as well. And eventually the last stage is mineralization, where all the organic compounds, they are reduced to inorganic substrate or inorganic residue. Inorganic residue. Now, this is not desirable. This is something which makes the soil slightly infertile again. So, ideally, if the soil has to remain fertile, it has to stay in these conditions, right? So, if moisture, warm temperature, and air is available in sufficient quantity, rate of decomposition will be very high. And as a consequence, the entire process will be completed. So the study has basically substantiated the same finding. So if in any region temperature is very high, think about it logically itself. There will you find presence of large amount of soil organic carbon? No. Why? Because here in this case rate of decomposition will also be very high. Decomposition will also be very high. So as a consequence, immediately it will lead to mineralization. So that is why here organic component will be low. Organic content will be low. Okay. So that is one of the findings. Then the importance of organic carbon. Why do we need to have the organic content? Because it basically is associated with the micronutrient. When you have greater amount of organic content, micronutrients are also present. It improves the soil biological activity as well, and the plants benefit. At the same time, it enhances the soil health, improves the water retention, reducing greenhouse gas emissions like methane, and increasing the amount of carbon storage in the soil, thus improving agricultural output and the well-being of the soil concerned as well. However, the relation with elevation and temperature. So, with temperature, we have seen that as the temperature increases, the soil organic compound, that concentration reduces. So, temperature, we can say, is inversely proportional to amount of soil organic carbon. Organic carbon. Okay? Inversely proportional. Right? Now, with elevation. So, think about it. If you go to a higher elevation, what will happen? Temperature will reduce. So again, rate of decomposition will reduce. So as a consequence, mineralization won't be reached immediately, right? You will have humification and catabolism existing for a long time. So if the elevation is high, then the organic carbon content is also high because the temperature will be. But we move from hills to lowland, then the temperature increases, organic carbon content. This is one of the reasons why temperature is one of the reasons why you will find that let's suppose, global example I'll give you, that if you compare the soil in, let's suppose, the Congo rainforest, right, the equatorial rainforest, you compare that to the soil in Britain, UK. UK has much lower temperature. The Congo rainforest has much higher amount of rainfall, much higher temperature. In Congo, you will find that the soil has got lower amount of fertility. Britain will have a higher rate of fertility in terms of the organic content. This was asked in the prelims examination last year based on the same principle about the rate and the stages of decomposition. Okay, I hope now you will be able to answer them as well. Now, having the study which was carried out, this study basically talked about the use of fertilizer also. That unsustainable use of fertilizers, that also decreases the organic component. How? Because when you have high use of fertilizers, for example, in Punjab and Haryana, it is very high. You see, when we talk about fertilizer application, ICAR in itself had given a recommendation that you have nitrogen, phosphate, potash, and phosphate, right? So these are the ones to be applied. So NPK should be applied in the ratio of 4 is to 2 is to 1, right? Now, in the regions like Punjab, the application has been found out, a study which was published in Down to Earth. Now, that found out that NPK application is close to around 36 is to 8 is to 1. So that is where the fertilizers are being applied endlessly, particularly urea, because the soil is turning infertile. And if you have to sustain the growth, you have to apply more fertilizer, which means you have to put in more water, leading to a sustained climatic or ecological loss, right? And in Haryana, the situation found out that it was close to around 27 is to 6 is to 1. Again, very poor. So when you have high usage of fertilizers, what does it do? It basically kills all the soil microbes, right? Kills soil microbes. Now, it is these microbes which would earlier carry out decomposition process. So if this is killed, then decomposition does not happen. And if the decomposition does not happen, then as a consequence, organic content is very organic carbon, its content be very, very. Okay. So that is basically the case of the relation of soil carbon with the temperature, elevation, and fertilizer. Let's take a look at the practice question. What is soil organic carbon content? Discuss the factors which influence them in Indian context. So, a simple question, introduction, you simply talk about what is SOC, right? The soil organic carbon content, right? And how it is generated through the decomposition of degraded plants and animals. In the body portion, you talk about the factors. So, factors and stages of decomposition. Stages of decomposition. Then you will be able to establish the relation of each of the factors. Relation with each of the factors. Each factor. How do you conclude that? In the light of changing climate and in the light of increased food demand, the need of the hour is to sustainably manage soil and carry out an eco friendly agricultural system. So that is why one needs to be very careful in, or one needs to carry out sustainable methods of agro system and uphold agroecology, agroforestry in order to secure the future livelihood and food security. Like that, you can end the answer. Then coming on to the next article, this is written by the Deputy Chief Minister of Tamil Nadu, Udayanidhi Stalin. Now, it talks about applying the Dravidian algorithm to sport. Now, majority of the article talks about that how since the DMK has come to power, they have basically galvanized the sport funding and sports infrastructure. While that is not very relevant for your examination, what DMK has done or what DMK has not done, that is not important for your examination requirements. What you can use this article, however, is for extracting the important key pointers about their investment in sports and using it as a case study about, if let's suppose a question comes, how can India better in sports performance, etc. You can always cite these examples along with the national initiatives as well. So the state has allocated around 1945 crores over 5 years for sports development, 28 new sports complexes, synthetic tracks, indoor arenas, 75 mini stadia are being set up across districts. The Kalainar Sports Kit Scheme that distributes sports equipment to panchayats and school, Elite Scheme and the Champions Development Scheme to provide training, scholarships, and financial support. And this is where the article was also cited that players, chess players like Prag and Gukesh, they are paid close to around 30 to 40 lakhs a year in order to ensure they train properly. So this is a kind of an infra build up or an institutional support to the sports person, and that is reflected by increased number of grandmasters in chess which are emerging out of Tamil Nadu. Tamil Nadu, by virtue, has been known for a long period of time, not in recent times only, but for a long period of time, as a kind of a chess grandmaster factory. Because if you roll back the clock as well, you'll find that this is a particular region of the country which has never stopped producing the prodigies when it comes to chess. Right. So that is again one of the major prowess of Tamil Nadu. And it is not only since 2021, in all honesty, that is the kind of the cultural aspect of the state in terms of how the people have taken up to the sport. Now, what is the vision for future? Sports Science Center has been established to promote evidence-based athlete management. Focus now includes biomechanics, nutrition, and psychology, and it basically aims a tool for social engineering and empowerment, and that is where you basically have the inclusive uh, progress which can happen. So this is something that you can cite as a way forward for the national sports movement as well. That you need to invest in the scientific aspect of the sports, create better infrastructure, ensure enabling programs at the grassroots level, larger livelihood or a lifestyle program like Fit India Mission, Khelo India Mission, and so that can be done. Then an article in the editorial talks about greater openness. India must not squander global trust in its management of wildlife. Now, this follows basically the findings from Vantara. Reliance Foundation has established one of the world's most elite and the largest private zoo, that is Vantara. Now, Vantara, it is not the case that you and I can visit openly. It is still on invite basis itself. Now, Vantara houses some of the most exotic species of the world and is known for animal rehabilitation. Now, you basically had the Supreme Court had constituted an SIT. SIT. Now, that SIT basically, that SIT had to report on the functioning of Vantara and processes followed. Now, what was quite surprising in the SIT report was, and that was a kind of a unique aspect, that SIT submitted the report to the Supreme Court in a sealed envelope. In a sealed envelope. Now, it is understood that, let's suppose you have a critical program, a report of critical national security that is being submitted in a sealed envelope. That is understandable. But then the report on Vantara was submitted to the Supreme Court. It was a Supreme Court backed SIT. Now that submitted its final report in a sealed envelope, which means that In India or across the globe, we are not aware about the exact finding. But the SIT, what did it say? It said everything is above board. How they are operating is absolutely fine. There are simply malified intentions at play who are raising their fingers against Vantara. So, in a way, provision of a clean check was given to Vantara. Having said that, there has been a lot of issue raised by countries like Brazil, for example. We have Spix macaw. Spix macaw is a species of bird which has been considered to be extinct in the wild. It is not to be found in the wild anymore. It was native to Brazil. Now, that Spix macaw made global headlines when the Prime Minister, during his visit to Vantara, was photographed with a Spix macaw close to his hand. Now, Brazil raised objections that where are you getting these Spix macaws from? After all, it is extinct in the wild. And if at all there are any Spix macaws, it would belong to us. Vantara said that, look, we have got it from Germany with the help of NGOs. So the allegations surfaced that you must have paid money to buy those Spix macaws. Vantara said that no, we have not paid money to buy them. Whatever cost was involved, that cost was involved in basic transportation, right? Transportation and arranging the logistics. So that was the basic argument, right? Now, here, what happened recently, why you have this article, is because you have a global convention that is known as Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species of Flora and Fauna, which basically is in charge of monitoring the illegal trade which is happening across the world in order to conserve the species of animals and plants. Now, I won't go into the details of what this sites is about. Sites, when they visited Vantara, they made two observations. First observation was that the conditions, the experts that Vantara has, it is world class. It has got the best experts, it has got the best rehabilitation processes which are there. But then it raised another question. It raised a question about where are you getting the animals from? Raised question on agreements, agreements and license. Where are you getting these animals from? For example, one of the case was that of Czechia or Czech Republic as we know it. They prefer the new name Czechia. But from Czech Republic, you had multiple species of organisms which were brought to Vantara. Now, Czech Republic has said that it has sold these animals to Vantara. Vantara has said we have not bought these animals. So think about it. Someone has said they have sold you a car, and you are saying that no, no, I have not bought a car. I have taken a car, and it was in the transportation of the car from the showroom to my house that I had to pay 5 lakh rupees. Right. So that is what Vantara is saying. Vantara is saying that we have not bought it from Czech Republic. The money that we have paid is purely for the transportation and logistics. This has raised a larger question on the seriousness with which the agreements and licenses are operating in countries like India. Mind you, cites a convention which was signed way back in 1973 previously has already blacklisted India twice, owing to the fact that India had a kind of a patchy record when it came to animal rights and also the smuggling of the animals and animal parts. So that has happened twice in the previous decades. Now, if India is seen to be an irresponsible country in terms of issuance of licenses, in terms of rehabilitation, that risks India being put into the blacklist for the third time now, which will be a blot in our overall endeavor to conserve wildlife, which we are doing. Naturally, we are conserving wildlife. We are one of the better countries in conserving wildlife. We have an increase in the forest cover. So, this private zoo should not be allowed to become a blot in the larger Indian story of conservation. Okay? Now, Then coming to another article. Does India need nutritional transformation? Now, it is about the fact that how India needs to shift from a kind of a food security paradigm to a kind of a nutrition security paradigm. Mind you, the article has argued that we in India, we are not great consumers of nutrition. Now, previous reports have also indicated that Indians in our diet, we are largely the carb consuming population. And we have talked about it previously as well. 3 days back, also, we talked about it. When we said that majority of our food, be it the rice, the chapatis, or any of the things that you consume, they basically provide carb, which is not considered to be healthy. And that is where we had said that, look, we Indians, we are not protein consuming in our staple diet to a large extent when it comes to animal protein in particular. Now, one of you had raised an objection that how can you say so? There are non-vegetarians in southern part of India, in eastern part of India. There are a lot of non-vegetarians who consume non-vegetarian. It is not about whether you consume non-vegetarian food or not. It is about will you have on a daily basis, 365 days a year, do you have only non-vegetarian meat item or fish item in your breakfast, in your lunch, in your snacks, and in your dinner? The answer is no. You go to any part of the country, north, south, east, or west, non vegetarian food might form one meal of your day, or might at max have 2 to 3 meals a week. But it is not as if animal protein is a part of your staple diet. That is because India has always been very rich ecologically, very rich agriculturally. So that is why we have always dependent upon the natural resources. Having said that, due to nutritional deficiency, increased amount of stunting malnutrition cases, the article argues now is the time to go for functional foods. And what do we mean by functional foods? Nutrient enriched products designed to improve health or prevent diseases. Example, vitamin enriched rice, omega 3 fortified milk, and so on. So you have biofortifications where various different kind of product cereals, they are enriched with nutrients. They leverage nutrigenomics, biofortification, 3D food printing, and even bioprocessing. Smart proteins, they are alternative to the animal protein. If you are not consuming animal proteins in large amount, that is where the concept of smart proteins have come. Now, what are those smart proteins? Plant-based proteins from legumes, from cereals, for example, soybeans that you have, then the various pulses that we consume in our staple diet, fermentation-driven proteins from microbial systems, especially microbes are fermented to provide the proteins, cultivated meat, what is also referred to as the artificial meat, right? Where you basically have bioreactors where the cells are grown. So you don't extract meat from the slaughterhouses. Now, why India needs a nutritional transformation? India's nutrition gap persists. Over one third of of the children, they are stunted. And there's a large rural urban divide when it comes to nutrition intake, when it comes to protein intake. There's a very, very large urban rural divide. And rising incomes have increased the demand for protein rich diets, but unsustainable food production means we are always deficient, for example, of the pulses. We don't have pulses and soybean to be so cheap that even the poorer population can consume it maybe 2 times a day or on a daily basis. So that means there is undernutrition, which is in the offing. What is the global trend? In 1980s, Japan was the first country basically, and this is important for you to retain for the mains examination, about how the world has responded when it comes to functional food. So Japan in the 1980s was the first country to put forth the concept of functional foods. Singapore, the first country to approve cultivated chicken, right? It has not picked up so massively, but nonetheless, it provided provisions for it. China and the EU are integrating protein production into their food security agendas. In India, the problem is even if, let's suppose, the functional foods come in, we don't have regulatory standards. We don't have any set decided regulatory standards. And mind you, this smart food and functional food, it is a growing market. Credit Suisse, the bank, has estimated that it will be close to hundreds of billions of dollars by 2030, around $230 billion by 2030. So global brands are entering into that. And if you don't have a set decided regulatory standard, you will be left behind. Domestic production will not happen, and then global imports will happen, which you cannot regulate. So, what India needs to do, India basically has to promote that. So, India promotes functional foods and smart proteins under Bio E3, that is Biotechnology for Economy, Environment and Employment, Department of Biotechnology, and BIRAC, they support R&D, research and development. Indian startups have come into the plant-based protein diet, and over 70 smart protein brands have been operating in India. But going ahead into the future, we have to capture the market of close to around $240 billion. India must develop a national regulatory framework, ensure clear definitions of what are smart proteins, plant based proteins, promote public education and awareness. Right? That is what is lacking. That is why you have people getting angry that how come you say that we have a vegetarian based diet? We are non vegetarian. No. Protein is not dependent on whether you consume non vegetarian item once a day or once a week. It is dependent upon how frequently and what is the efficiency of that food. Foster collaboration between agriculture, biotech, and even nutrition sectors. Okay. Now, then we come to certain articles relevant for your prelims. Aditya L1 mission gets a close look at eruptions from the sun. Now, Aditya L1 mission, we have discussed it multiple times previously, which is set at the Lagrange point L1. Now, at there, it is observing the sun from very close quarters. And it is there that it has basically managed to witness and measure the coronal mass ejections. Now, this is how the coronal mass ejections they look like. They are very, very massive, by the way. They are said to have a mass, a weight of around 270 million tons. They are constituted of gases and plasma, right? 270 million tons is the mass of these ejections. Just to give you a kind of a comparison, the iceberg due to which the giant ship Titanic sank almost a century back, that iceberg was only 1.5 million tons, right? So that is how massive CMEs are. Now, these CMEs, they travel at a blinding pace of 264 kilometer per second. So that is what a coronal mass ejection is: large expulsion of plasma and magnetic field from the sun's corona or outer atmosphere. They can travel through space, and if they hit the magnetosphere of planet Earth, they can cause geostorms, they can impact the power lines of communication, they can knock out the satellites, and obviously, they also cause the auroras in the northern hemisphere, aurora borealis, and in the southern hemisphere, aurora australis. Then, what's the latest in climate science? So basically, this is an article in the science section. Now, it talks about the findings and the latest reports by IPCC, Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which talks about the fact that the rise of temperature has been accelerated. Now, average global temperature is rising at 0.27 degrees Celsius per decade, which is much higher. Earlier, it was zero point 0.2 degrees Celsius per decade. So increase by almost 50%. And what this has done, this has basically accelerated the melting of ice sheets. One of the largest ice sheets in Antarctica is melting, Arctic is melting at increased rate, which is leading to a sea level rise. The sea level rise, even as per the WMO report, World Meteorological Organization report, that has indicated that the sea level is now rising at a rate of around 4.5 millimeter per year in the last decade, as compared to average of 1.85 millimeter per year previously. That is why you have countries like Tuvalu, which are close to getting submerged, and that is why you have phased migrations from regions of Tuvalu to Australia. Okay. Now coming to the last article, Bhutan eyes role of global spiritual peacemaker to host annual prayer festival uniting. So you basically have the global peace festival, right? The global prayer peace festival, which is being held in Bhutan for the first time. Now, what Bhutan has done, it has brought the three sects of Buddhism together. For example, Mahayan sect, right? Mahayan sect. So from region of China, China, Singapore, Singapore, and Taiwan. Delegations of Mahayan sect have arrived in Bhutan. Then you have the Theravada sect of Buddhism. They have come from Cambodia, Myanmar, Cambodia, Myanmar, and Thailand, Sri Lanka. Okay, Thailand and Myanmar. Then you have the Vajrayan sect of Buddhism. That is where you have Bhutan, India, and Tibet. Bhutan, India, and Tibet. So that is the three sects which have been brought together. And we had discussed yesterday that Piprava relics have been transported from India to Bhutan for a limited time period. Now, the aim is that from next year onwards, they will try to make it an annual event, and they will try to get the all the various different major religions together and ensure that there is a global move towards spiritual. So that brings us to the end of the discussion for the day. I hope the discussion has been enriching. And if you have liked the content, please put that in the comment section and hit the like, subscribe, and the share button. Till we meet again, take care. Goodbye. Thank you.